Inflation isn't just a debate, it's actually a class war. And it's not just between two classes, but rather by several classes broken down by income, assets, age, demographics, and more. And for those not paying attention and not understanding the battle lines being drawn, they're going to be surprised by the acceleration of the unraveling, and they're going to find themselves without any choices or options as it all comes crashing down. What's up, everyone? This is Mark, and today I want to prepare you for the real class war that's shaping up so that you can understand who these different classes are, what the different sides are, and so that you can understand, you can prepare for what's happening, and you don't end up on the part, on the majority that ends up losing everything, but instead survives and thrives from this shift. And I'm going to cover as much as I can in about 10 short minutes. If you don't stick around to the end, I want you to know that I am doing a 1-hour live special presentation next Thursday. You can get all the information at the link in the description of this video. All right, so jumping right into it, it seems like the main word we hear today is inflation, right? You hear it all the time. Inflation, inflation, inflation. The Fed is trying to get 2% inflation. The Fed isn't getting their inflation. Are we going to get inflation? Are we going to get deflation? And on and on and on, right? And most people who think they understand economics, but have mostly probably been trained by modern university, they are taught a version of Keynesian economics, which teaches we need to spend money. We need to spend and spend and spend in order to grow. And then inflation is not only good, but it's actually required to allow the economy to expand. And then, of course, others who have learned economics through a more Austrian lens like me, who are sound money believers, are going to tell you that inflation is theft. Inflation steals the value from your wages, steals the value from your wealth, your savings. But today, I'm not here to debate inflation versus deflation, but rather to show you another way to look at this. And we want to look at or examine some of the different sides because it has serious implications. It's so big, in fact, that, like I said at the beginning, it's actually creating its own class war. And we're going to see this play out. It's probably not going to be pretty, but I want you to have the information. Now, we've been told, like I said, that inflation is necessary. It's necessary for the macroeconomy. And so then the trick for the Fed and the other policymakers is to find a way to basically ride the line, to have this balancing act, to ride the line to maximizing inflation in the economy, but only to the point that it doesn't kill off businesses, it doesn't kill off jobs, and the overall economy. And so, these policymakers believe that the regular people on Main Street, like you and I, basically just have to suck it up. We just have to grin. We have to bear all the negative consequences that come from inflation. And we have to do that for the greater good, for the good of the entire economy. Now, this narrative dominates economics today, but it ignores what I think is the core reality of inflation in America and the implications and realities of this inflation and what's becoming, like I said, this battleground for this class war. And it's accelerating. So let me explain what I'm talking about. So inflation affects different people in different ways. All right. So not everybody sees inflation the same way. It depends on which class, which economic class you're in, because it affects everyone very differently. So when inflation boosts the value of assets, such as house prices going up, stocks going up, bonds, etc., when all those asset prices go to the moon, well, everybody who owns those assets are happy. They see their net worth, going up in dollars terms. They feel more wealthy. They feel more happy. But for the other economic class, the people who don't own any assets, right? They don't own a home, they don't own stocks, they don't own assets. All they get from inflation is basically reduced purchasing power from their wages. Their dollars that they're earning, they're working for, are paying for less and less and less, buying less and less and less. So for this group, whose only income, I should say, is earned from their labor, they suffer the most. They suffer as they see their paychecks buying fewer goods, it buys fewer services. And it's this difference that's really creating these two different classes. The people that own assets see their wealth soaring, and those who don't own any assets, they're working for their pay, see their labor purchasing less and less and less. Now, when I put it this way, it seems pretty obvious, right? And you might be thinking to yourself, well, doesn't the Fed see this? Don't the policymakers understand this? Don't they know about this? One of the policies is trying to bridge the gap between rich and poor, right? Shouldn't they be doing something? Well, yes, of course, they know about this, right? Of course. Now, the Federal Reserve, the federal authorities, the policymakers, they're not just neutral observers in this, right? They're the ones that are driving this. And the Federal Reserve really only cares about two different things. One, enriching the banking sector and further enriching, the already rich people, the ones that own assets. The banking sector makes money by lending newly created currency to borrowers. And, if there's no new borrowers, there's no new loans, and then banks, they go broke. So the Fed tries their magic balancing trick, trying to create the right, good kind of inflation. So it tries to lower the cost of borrowing money by lowering the interest rates to entice people to take out more loans. And then, of course, take out loans and then buy things that they probably don't even need. But again, back to that Keynesian economics, trying to spend and spend and spend. But at the same time, it tries to inflate the market value of the collateral that the banks and Wall Street need to support more debt, right? So the collateral for the debt, of course, the stocks, the real estate, etc. So they want to inflate that so the banks and Wall Street have more collateral on their commercial buildings, their homes, stocks, bonds, etc. This inflation of asset valuations makes those who already own these assets richer and richer and richer, while making those who live on wages, who basically live paycheck to paycheck, they're just stuck having to pay these inflated prices for these assets with wages that are already losing purchasing power. And this is why the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The rich own assets that go up with inflation. The poor just work for wages that go down in purchasing power. Now, the Fed, I don't think they really care if small businesses go broke. If me, our households, we go bankrupt. The Fed's only concern, the primary concern, is maintaining inflation. They talk about it all the time. 2%, 2%, 2%. Okay, forget 2%. Let's just go to 4%, like whatever, right? They just want inflation, and they want asset valuations, or they want to see the assets going up, inflating, but they want the cost of borrowing to deflate, to go down. And when you lower the cost of borrowing, make debt more accessible, then you get the zombie corporations that aren't even really profitable, but they can continue to live because of the cheap money. We can, of course, see local federal governments and everyone else borrow more money, which, of course, you guessed it, just makes the banks and Wall Street even more money. Now, this is the sole goal of the Fed. Everything else is basically distracting, right? Press releases and all this stuff that they're doing, but it's not their main goal. Now, there's downsides to this, of course, but they fall on me, they fall on you, they fall on the little guy. So the economists, the policymakers, the Fed, they don't even bother to track what the downsides of this are, which is why we see government policymakers continue to change the way that inflation is measured. They look at CPI, Consumer Price Index, and of course they've changed the way that they calculate inflation through the CPI so many times. Basically, they just keep pushing the goalpost back and forth. In 1980, there was a massive overhaul to the way that they changed or the way they calculated CPI. There was another really big overhaul in the 90s. And today, it's different again, and they just can't seem to get the inflation of even 2%. But that's because they've moved it. They've changed it so many times. If we went back to the measuring stick from the 1980s and we applied it to today, we could see that inflation's well over 10%. But of course, that doesn't serve their purpose. The government statisticians have to keep the official measurements of inflation low so they can continue to push the policy of lowering rates and putting out more money. Because, of course, this hides the truth that real world inflation in the cost of, we see it everywhere, in the cost of education, healthcare, health insurance, rent, and so on, all the other big ticket household costs that you and I have to pay for are going higher and higher and higher, right? They're going to the moon. And at the same time, as I said, right, our dollars, our paychecks are buying less and less and less. Now, I know this sounds a little bit negative. Sometimes people tell me I'm a little bit too negative on this, but I want to bring our attention to these things because it's important to learn how to navigate them. And I know that as bad as it sounds, and maybe I'm making the Fed seem a little bit evil, I would say that I don't think that they're out to screw over little guys. I don't think that. Now, maybe it's just me because I always seem to find the good in people. I always believe that there's some good in there. I think the Fed just wants to try and make everybody happy. Like I said, they're trying to find that magic balancing act right there. But at the end of the day, they have priorities, and some priorities are higher than others. And their priorities are to let the banks make money, right? That's what it is, right? The Fed is owned by a private coalition of banks. So that's their goal, to enrich themselves, not to enrich you. Now, if you want a little bit of an example of how wages and pay have gone down, or purchasing power has gone down, I mean, you can see examples of this all over the place. I mean, I couldn't cite them all, but back in the day when I was young, I could rent a studio apartment for about half a week's pay, about 2.5 days. But imagine today going to a major city and trying to get an apartment for 2.5 days worth of pay. I don't think you could do it. As a matter of fact, it would probably take you 2 weeks, if not 3 weeks of pay just to get a room, right? That's how much prices have gone up, or I should say our purchasing power has gone down. That's a massive loss of purchasing power and labor. Now, meanwhile, like I said, those with the right kinds of assets, houses, stocks, etc., have seen huge increases, have seen fantastic increases in their earned income and their wealth. And all that gain in wealth exceeds the loss of their purchasing power. So yes, everyone is getting the same purchasing power loss, but the assets are offsetting that. So what are the right and the wrong types of assets? Well, let's start with what the wrong types of assets are. So the wrong type of assets would be dollars, right? If you have a savings account, that's the wrong type of asset. So you've got a lot of money in the bank, that's really good, but it's the wrong type of asset. So like in the 80s, for example, you might have earned 10% interest in that bank. Today, you barely get over zero, less than 1%. And with inflation target of 2%, that means you're actually losing money to inflation. So you're holding your money in savings, but it's losing purchasing power every single day. So then what are the right types of assets to own? Well, of course, assets that go up with inflation. Real estate, obviously. Stocks have done really, really well. If you own those two things, you've seen your wealth go way up. There's just one little tiny problem, right, with the right types of assets, and that the vast majority are owned by the top 5% of households, with the top 1% owning 40% and the top 0.1% owning 20%, more than the bottom 80% own. So these are the wealth income classes, those who own the assets that go up with inflation and those who don't, right? There's also demographic and age classes too. Young wage earners are mostly priced out of buying these types of assets. You know, the millennials, they can't afford to buy houses, stocks are overpriced, etc. You know, unless for some reason they can get like this huge loan and they could, you know, probably spend all their time trying to make enough money even just to service the debts of those loans, because they already have debts from student loans, which I said are way up, auto loans, mortgages, etc. And then on the other side of that, we have the baby boomers, right? And they're all trying to retire. And because they're trying to get income to live off their savings, and there's no yield, right? They used to be able to earn 10%. Now they earn 0%. They're basically forced into gambling now. Now they have to take these really, really risky bets, and they're basically gambling in this Fed-rigged casino, which of course just seems to happen to crash at least once per decade. And depending on when you're retiring, it could pretty much wipe you out. And of course, being a retiree, you don't have the time to earn that back. And so I know there's a lot of people out there that think the Fed has your back, but they don't. The Fed has the bank's back. And so hopefully you understand that inflation is not just an abstract debate. It's actually a class war. And it's not just between two classes, those who depend on wages and those who have assets. It's actually between, you know, lots of different people, age, demographics, political loyalties, issues. Every one of these fractured classes is competing for scarce resources, for scarce income, like I said, and scarce security. Those who don't see the fragmentation, the scarcities, and the battle lines being drawn are going to be surprised by the acceleration of the unraveling. And for those not watching this unfold and preparing right now, you're not going to have many choices and options when it all comes crashing down. Now, I know this is a big, scary subject. I can't cover it all in, less than 15 minutes. So if you want to learn how to watch these battle lines being drawn and how to formulate your own plan for success, I'm having a live 1-hour presentation next week. You can find the link in the description of this video. Now, of course, as always, give me a thumbs up on this video if you like it. If you don't like the video, it's too scary, give me some thumbs down. But either way, let me know what you think. Leave me a comment down below. I try to reply to as many of those comments as I possibly can. And that's all I got. To your success, I'm out.